Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of J-Man's Rants from the Road podcast. Now, since we're going to go ahead and dive back into the Chauvin trial and the George Floyd case, since today the closing arguments were made by both sides, and now the jury will deliberate on this case. So while we wait on the results of that, I thought we'd go ahead and dive back into this entire case. We'll go back in time to May 25th, 2020. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Minneapolis Police Department were dispatched on a call on somebody trying to pass off counterfeit bills. Upon arriving at the location, they are then told that the suspect is still there, sitting in his car in front of the store. They proceed to make the arrest. During the arrest, the suspect passes away. That subsequent evening, protests and riots broke out in Minneapolis. The next morning, on the 26th, an announcement was made that all four officers would be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Again, that evening, more protests and riots broke out in Minneapolis. On the 27th, the next day, all four officers were then fired, but no charges were pressed. That evening showed the most violent evening of the protests and riots, as looting and damage to stores broke out, including buildings being set on fire, namely the Target, AutoZone, Wendy's, and a 5-story apartment complex. From that day through the next couple of weeks, protests and riots broke out throughout every major city in the United States, including several innocent bystanders killed during these events. Now let's fast forward to about 8-9 months to earlier this year, here in 2021, when the body cam footage was released and the medical examiner's report was released. Now we'll get to the medical examiner's report a little bit later, but let's first focus on the police body cam footage. As you see, the footage begins. They approach George Floyd's vehicle. They knock on his window, ask him to step out of the car, explaining to him that he's being detained for the counterfeit bills. He's a little uncooperative, but for the most part cooperative at this point. It's still early in on the stage, but you can tell he's unsure of how the situation is going to go down. They get him out of the car, no force necessary. They handcuff him. They walk him over to the side of the building where they allow him to sit to presumably calm down so they can explain to him the situation, why he's being detained and then arrested. They then help him to his feet and start to lead him over to the police cruiser, where they explain to him they're going to put him in the back of the police cruiser. At this point, he starts to get very irate. He talks about how he has claustrophobia and he can't breathe. This is the first time he mentions that he can't breathe. This is about 8 to 10 minutes prior to him being on the ground. Now, at this point through this video, there is no excessive force. In fact, they're showing very good patience with him throughout this entire proceedings. And they're working with him with the claustrophobia. They're trying to come up with ideas. Hey, what if you sit in the car, we'll leave the window open here on the door and I'll talk with you to help calm you down. And this isn't working either. At some point during this discussion where they're trying to get him to agree to go into the back seat, another officer opens up the other side door on the back of the cruiser. So both doors now are open in the back of this cruiser. I'm assuming that the other officer is probably, opening the door either to aid and getting George Floyd into the back of the cruiser, or B, maybe to open up other options as far as, hey, let's just sit in there, we'll leave the doors open, but we'll have an officer on each side so you can't get out, but at least you're not as claustrophobic. I can only speculate on how the officers were feeling at this point. I can tell you that when they took him out of his own vehicle, the windows were up, and he did have a passenger in the passenger seat. So, in my opinion, being in the back of that squad car, he would have actually had more space because there was nobody sitting next to him than he did when he was in his own vehicle. So I'm not sure I buy the claustrophobia, but at least the cops were trying to, help him in getting through this. So they then tried to get him into the squad car again, not using excessive force. This was a whole narrative, excessive force. At some point, he gets about halfway in, and you can see he notices that the passenger door is open. He makes a diving attempt at the passenger door. Now he's laid across both seats in the back of the cruiser with his feet out in the driver's side and his head and shoulders out the passenger side. At this point, you can't close the doors on him because he would be in an awkward position, especially being that he's in handcuffs. Screaming, "I can't breathe," this entire time, mind you. So they then proceed to go ahead and pull him from the passenger side door. Again, not using excessive force. They lay him down, face down on the ground beside the cruiser. And this is when Derek Chauvin allegedly puts his knee in George Floyd's neck. He's still screaming, he can't breathe. They're listening to this for a couple of minutes. The video ends there, but presumably not long after he goes unresponsive. The ambulance shows up, they check his vitals, he has none. They attempt CPR in the ambulance to no avail. He's pronounced dead in the ambulance at the scene. Now, from the jump, the reason why I can tell you right now who was the most responsible for this entire event, it was the national media. From the jump on May 25th, the national media's response to this was, white officer kills a black unarmed man. They show the video from the bystander with their cell phone footage of Derek Chauvin allegedly with his neck on his knee on George Floyd's neck. And from this point on, it's blown up as a racist incident. We have systemic racism in the country. The police are racist. We need to defund the police. The protests, the riots, all this stuff because of this narrative. And the excessive force is also included. Now, if the media responds to this incident on day one, stating that a suspect passed away in the process of being arrested by a police officer, as soon as we get all the details, we will bring them to you. No protests, no riots, no systemic racism. Now, as I talked about, that was the body cam footage. Now the medical examiner's report states that the death of George Floyd is undetermined. If the death, and it also shows that there are no bruising to his neck or damage to his trachea, and which these cases would have been had Chauvin actually had his knee on his neck. Also, the death would have been ruled as asphyxiation due to the lack of airway with the knee being on the throat. And that's not the case. It was undetermined. So, like I said, if the media doesn't spill the narrative of saying it as a racist issue, drawing race to both parties, which I think is ridiculous, we wouldn't have had any of these protests or riots or loss of life that were unnecessary because of all this. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to tell you how I really think this, some people might not like this narrative, but listen to this. If all 4 police officers were black and George Floyd was white, none of you would have heard about this at all. And if you think that's a bold statement and untrue, go to Google, go to YouTube, type in the search bar, black police officer kills white man or white man killed by black police officer. And you'll see the responses. You'll see the search, what it comes up. And then you'll see it. I ain't far from the truth. So, that's my narrative. I think that the racism needs to be thrown out the window on this whole situation. Tell me what you think. If you like this video, hit me a like button, give me a comment, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to click on that bell so you can be notified when I upload again. And you can also follow me on Twitter at JManFromKC. Thank y'all and have a good day.